Dubrow Suspicion Files.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We are diving into a case that remains one of the most frustrating, contradictory, and, heavily scrutinized investigations in modern American history. The homicide of 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey.
It really is. And this deep dive is about stripping away the decades of media circus, all the tabloid noise, and focusing strictly on the forensic facts.
Exactly. The facts that create this legal stalemate that has lasted for decades.
It is the ultimate cold case, defined by complexity. I mean, on the morning of December 26, 1996, in Boulder, Colorado, JonBenét was found murdered, bludgeoned, and strangled in her family home.
But the tragedy isn't just the sheer brutality of the crime. It's the fact that the evidence points in two completely different, totally opposite directions.
And both of those narratives feel almost impossible to ignore. That's the central problem.
That dual reality is our mission today. We've gone through the investigative files, the autopsy protocols, FBI behavioral analyses, and, the reports on DNA kinetics.
And they present what you can really call a profound paradox.
So let's lay out those two theories for everyone.
Okay, so on one hand, you have the intruder theory, or IDI. This theory posits that an unknown outsider, a complete stranger, broke into the house and committed the crime.
And the main support for that is hard biological evidence, right?
It is. It's the DNA of an unknown male found on the victim's clothing. That's the cornerstone of the IDI theory.
Okay, and then the second theory.
The second theory is the family involvement theory, which you'll hear called RDI or BDI. This argues that the crime was domestic.
So an accident or maybe a sudden act of rage?
Exactly. And that this initial act was then followed by an elaborate, frantic attempt to stage a kidnapping and, cover up what really happened.
And that theory rests on an overwhelming stack of circumstantial evidence.
It does. What's immediately clear from reviewing the investigative material, though, is that the case was damaged almost before it even started.
The first few hours were just a mess.
A mess is putting it lightly. The crucial initial hours were marked by catastrophic procedural failures and the contamination of that crime scene. It's what created the very reasonable doubt that has prevented prosecution for decades.
We see that failure right out of the gate. The police, they presumed it was a kidnapping because of this long ransom note they found on the stairs.
Right, and that assumption immediately delayed the application of strict homicide protocols. So instead of securing the entire house as a crime scene,
they only sealed off JonBenét's bedroom.
Just her bedroom. And this is where the contamination really begins. Friends of the family, victim advocates, the minister, they were all allowed to walk freely through the ground floor for hours.
Comforting the Ramseys, which is understandable,
But they were also cleaning up. They were destroying crucial trace evidence. Footprints, fibers, potential fingerprints on the phone that was used to call 911.
It's just incredible.
That contamination essentially destroyed what you could call the evidentiary bridge. It made it impossible to ever conclusively separate an intruder's path from the family's own, innocent movements.
So our objective today is to analyze this raw data. We're going to contrast the evidence points that support the IDI theory against those that support the RDI theory to show you exactly why this investigation is locked in this permanent legal stalemate. Let's begin with the timeline, because this is really where the Ramseys' initial account collides violently with the hard science of forensic pathology.
It's the first major fracture in their story. The official account given by the Ramseys was very specific.
Right. They said that on Christmas night, December 25th, they returned from a dinner party at the White family home at about 10:00 p.m.
Correct. And JonBenét was asleep in the car. John said he carried her straight upstairs. Patsy changed her into her long john pajamas and put her straight to bed.
The whole house was supposedly asleep by 10:30 p.m. John, Patsy, and their 9-year-old son, Burke.
The narrative they established was one of total quiet and vulnerability. It implies that an intruder could slip into the residence, abduct the child from her room, move her all the way down to the basement,
commit the murder, and then take the time to write a lengthy 3-page ransom note.
All while the parents were supposedly sound asleep on the 3rd floor. That narrative collapses almost instantly when you look at the autopsy.
The pineapple.
The pineapple. Dr. John Meyer, the Boulder County coroner, recovered, and I'm quoting here, fragmented pieces of yellow to light green tan, apparent vegetable or fruit material, which may represent fragments of pineapple from JonBenét's stomach.
This sounds like such a trivial detail, but you're saying this single piece of fruit is scientifically devastating to that 10:30 p.m. bedtime claim. How?
It all comes down to forensic physiology, specifically something called digestive kinetics. The human stomach breaks down and empties its contents relatively quickly.
And the pineapple wasn't broken down at all.
It was fresh. It was undigested, completely identifiable. Forensic analysts determined that based on this state, ingestion had to have occurred between 45 minutes and 2 hours prior to her estimated time of death.
So let's break that down. If the murder happened in the window between, say, 11:30 p.m. and 1:30 a.m.,
then she had to have been eating that pineapple somewhere between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. at the absolute latest, well after her parents claimed she was sound asleep in her bed.
And we know exactly where she ate it because the evidence was right there in plain sight.
Right there in the kitchen. A bowl of fresh pineapple, consistent with the material found in her stomach, was sitting on the breakfast nook table, along with a serving spoon.
And the fingerprints tie it directly back to the family, specifically Patsy and Burke.
That's right. Patsy Ramsey's latent prints were found on the bowl. But even more critically, Burke Ramsey's prints were found both on the bowl and on an adjacent glass of iced tea.
So this evidence places JonBenét, Patsy, and Burke all potentially awake and interacting with that pineapple in the kitchen.
During the supposed hours of deep sleep. This is what investigators call the pineapple gap. It's a hole in their story that they could never explain.
Now, let me just push back on this for a second, because the intruder theory has to have an explanation for this, right?
Well, the explanation is
Yeah.
it's just not very plausible.
So the idea would be that an intruder breaks in, finds the pineapple in the fridge, and then what? Coaxes the child awake and downstairs to eat a snack before killing her.
That is precisely why criminologists find the IDI theory so improbable when you measure it against this specific piece of evidence. You have to believe a sexual predator or a kidnapper whose entire strategy relies on stealth and speed.
Would risk everything by pausing their mission to feed the victim a snack in the kitchen.
Right under the noses of the sleeping family, potentially. And then move her to the basement to execute a complex murder and staging. It doesn't fit the profile of a professional criminal or even a fleeing opportunistic attacker.
It creates the necessary domestic window. It creates time for an event, a struggle, maybe an argument over the food, a moment of rage in the kitchen that leads to the initial trauma.
And it places the family right there at the scene of the action when they claimed they were out cold.
The circumstantial evidence starts to build immediately from that point, which brings us to the behavioral analysis at the 911 call.
Yes. The 911 call placed by Patsy Ramsey at 5:52 a.m. This is a true centerpiece of the RDI, the family involvement theory.
The operator, 𝐏𝐻𝐃𝐂𝐀𝐒, had immediate concerns about Patsy's behavior on that call, didn't she?
She did. 𝐏𝐻𝐃𝐂𝐀𝐒 later testified that Patsy's voice was, hysterical. It was filled with screaming and hyperventilation right up until the point she believed the operator had disconnected the line.
And in that instant, her whole demeanor switched.
It switched abruptly. It went from sheer panic to what 𝐏𝐻𝐃𝐂𝐀𝐒 described as matter of fact.
And the alleged comment, caught just as the line was dropping, was, "Okay, we've called the police, now what?"
Exactly. That sudden, dramatic shift in emotional presentation was a major red flag for trained personnel. It suggested to them that the hysteria might have been, performative.
And then, years later, audio experts performed an analysis on the background noise after the official end of the call.
This is fascinating stuff. Aerospace engineers, using advanced filtering technology, claim to have isolated a hushed conversation involving 3 distinct voices in those final seconds.
And the sources suggest those voices were allegedly John Ramsey saying, "We're not speaking to you."
Patsy Ramsey saying, "Help me, Jesus."
And then, most controversially, the high-pitched voice of a young boy, believed to be Burke Ramsey, allegedly asking, "What did you do?" or "What did you find?"
And if the presence of Burke's voice is verified on that tape, it utterly shatters the Ramseys' persistent claim that Burke slept through the entire ordeal.
That he was only awakened later that morning by the police.
Yes. It suggests that by 5:52 a.m., the entire family was awake, gathered together, and potentially coordinating their story, or, dealing with the immediate fallout, before the police even arrived.
All of this chaos just fed directly into the investigation's most profound failure. When the police arrived at 5:55 a.m., that scene was treated as a potential kidnapping, not a murder, all because of the note.
And the result was just catastrophic. Detective Arndt, the first responding officer, allowed the ground floor to become a public thoroughfare. The contamination was immediate and immense.
We're talking about potential footprints, hairs, fibers, or fingerprints being wiped out by non-police personnel.
People were cleaning the kitchen, comforting the family for 7 hours. That delay in designating the scene as a homicide meant the potential killer's path if the intruder theory is true, was irrevocably blurred.
It wasn't until 1:00 p.m. that day, 7 hours later, that Detective Arndt instructed John Ramsey to search the house himself for anything amiss.
At which point John went straight to the latched wine cellar door in the basement and discovered his daughter's body.
That delay, coupled with the contamination, means that so much of the physical evidence that could have potentially linked the crime to an intruder was either destroyed or compromised to the point of being useless. So, if the pineapple created this domestic timeline, the ransom note is really the centerpiece of the staging theory. This 3-page document found on the spiraled staircase is maybe the most audacious and perplexing piece of physical evidence in the whole case.
It is the defining signature of the staging theory. You know, a normal kidnapper wants two things: speed and distance.
Right. Get in, get out, leave instructions, and get away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This note defies both of those principles. It was written using materials found in the Ramsey home.
On a pad of paper taken from a desk.
And a black Sharpie felt-tip pen, which was discovered nearby in the kitchen.
So the author was not hurried at all.
Not in the slightest. Handwriting experts estimated that writing a legible, verbose letter of 370 words, which is extremely long for a ransom demand, would have taken between 21 and 25 minutes.
A quarter of an hour. An intruder, having just committed a brutal crime and needing to flee, would not spend that kind of time sitting safely in the home composing a dramatic letter.
No. The time investment alone suggests the author felt completely safe and unhurried in that environment.
And the sources confirmed there was even a practice note, right?
Yes, which is even more bizarre.
Yeah.
An aborted start containing just Mr. Mrs. followed by a vertical line was found on the pad itself.
So they messed up and had to start over.
It shows the author struggled to get the tone or the introduction right. This reinforced the FBI's belief that the note was composed by someone unfamiliar with criminal ransom demands, but deeply, deeply familiar with the Ramseys' home and their schedule.
Okay, now let's get to the demand itself. The amount demanded was $118,000. Why is that specific, relatively low figure such a huge red flag?
It's a matter of forensic accounting, really. That exact figure, $118,000, closely corresponded to John Ramsey's 1996 Christmas bonus.
Which was calculated at $118,117.50.
Almost to the penny. The demand suggests the author had intimate, insider knowledge of John Ramsey's recent finances.
It's not a round number like $500,000 or $1 million, which a professional ring this small foreign faction the note references would demand.
The low specific number really minimizes the financial motive, doesn't it? It makes the crime look less like extortion and more like something deeply personal.
And the linguistic analysis of the text itself is even more fascinating. Analysts determined the language was basically fabricated from pop culture tropes.
It really was. The note doesn't sound like a hardened criminal. It reads like a movie script. It's someone play-acting at being a kidnapper.
Can you give us a specific example of that alleged cinematic plagiarism?
Certainly. There's one phrase in the note that says, "Don't try to grow a brain, John." This is strikingly similar to a line of dialogue from the 1994 film Speed, which was a massive blockbuster at the time.
And there are others.
Oh, yes. Another bizarre passage reads, "If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies." That echoes the kind of menacing, stylized threats you'd find in films like Dirty Harry or similar high-tension thrillers. The note is it's literary theater, not a genuine criminal document.
It's an assumed persona, but you're saying the natural writing style of the author bleeds through.
That's where you get these bizarre tonal inconsistencies. The note oscillates wildly between extreme graphic threats, talking about beheadings and execution, and then these strangely polite or even nurturing pieces of advice.
Like telling the father of the kidnapped victim to get some rest.
Exactly. The author actually tells John Ramsey, "I advise you to be rested. If you attempt to fool us, JonBenét will be dead."
It's completely inconsistent with a hardened criminal trying to terrorize someone.
Linguistic analysts found this maternal concern to be highly inconsistent with the implied small foreign faction, but, well, highly consistent with Patsy Ramsey's known communication style and personality. The note simply could not maintain the persona it was trying to create.
And what about that cryptic sign-off? Victory. SBTC.
Investigators scoured every database. There is no known criminal or terrorist organization using those initials. Theories ranged wildly from saved by the cross, tying into the family's deep religious background, to just a random collection of letters meant to sound official.
The FBI consensus was that it was a fake sign-off for a fake crime.
A last-minute addition to try and sell the authenticity. Which brings us to the handwriting forensics, which is arguably the most damning piece of soft evidence against Patsy Ramsey.
Okay, let's break this down.
The CBI and independent forensic document examiners analyzed handwriting samples from the entire immediate family. John and Burke Ramsey were definitively eliminated as authors.
But not Patsy.
Patsy Ramsey was the only person tested who could not be eliminated. The results were officially inconclusive, meaning they couldn't say with 100% certainty that she did write it, but they absolutely could not rule her out.
But the experts found something more than just an inconclusive result, didn't they? They found striking similarities.
They did, especially in the formation of specific letters, like the lowercase a and the capital Q. The analysis suggested the author was actively attempting to disguise their own writing.
You could see shaky lines, maybe from trying to use their non-dominant hand.
Exactly. But the natural patterns were still there. This is what analysts call bleed-through. Even when the author was consciously trying to make the lines irregular and messy, their subconscious muscle memory, the inherent way they space words, form loops, the pressure they apply, it's still shown through.
And it matched Patsy's style.
It matched Patsy's style in numerous ways. So the prevailing FBI theory, built from this extensive analysis, is that the note was written by Patsy Ramsey after the child's death, using supplies from the home to stage a kidnapping, buy critical time, and deflect all suspicion away from the family.
This 3-page theatrical production is really why the staging theory remains so incredibly compelling. If the staging theory centers on the note and the timeline, the medical evidence forces us to confront the horrific realities of that night. We're moving now into the autopsy, which presents this terrible duality of trauma that forensic analysts still cannot fully sequence.
That's right. The victim sustained 2 separate lethal assaults: a severe craniocerebral injury from blunt force trauma and asphyxia by strangulation.
And for the medical examiner, the key question was always, which injury came first? And was JonBenét conscious during both?
Let's start with head trauma. The description of the injury is just horrifying. It's a massive 8.5-inch rectangular fracture that ran along the right side of her skull.
An 8.5-inch fracture. Wow.
This was a tremendously forceful, focused blow, likely one single strike, which fractured the skull and displaced a fragment into the brain, causing significant hemorrhage and contusion. The blow was absolutely severe enough to cause instant, deep unconsciousness.
What's so unique about that injury, though, is the lack of visible external damage.
That's a critical detail.
Yeah.
There was very little external bleeding or, laceration at the impact site. This suggests the weapon used was smooth and blunt, allowing the skin to remain largely intact while delivering that massive internal damage.
And the lack of external bleeding also suggests something about the timing, doesn't it?
It does. It suggests the heart may have been beating very weakly, or perhaps even stopped shortly after the blow was delivered. Which leads us to the hypothesized weapon, tying directly back to the kitchen staging.
The Maglite flashlight.
Yes. The dimensions of that depressed rectangular fracture roughly match the head of the heavy black Maglite flashlight that was later found on the kitchen counter. This object perfectly fits the description of a smooth, blunt weapon capable of causing that specific type of internal injury.
And the Maglite had been handled suspiciously.
It had. It had been wiped completely clean of fingerprints, both the interior and exterior surfaces. This is highly inconsistent with a normal household flashlight that's used regularly.
But it's perfectly consistent with a murder weapon that someone intentionally cleaned and then placed in plain sight during the staging process.
Exactly. Now we move to the official cause of death: asphyxia by strangulation, which was associated with the head trauma. And this involved the garrote.
The garrote was a makeshift weapon fashioned from common household items.
It was. It consisted of a white nylon cord tied tightly around the neck, and it was tightened by a rigid wooden handle. And that handle was a broken paintbrush.
And here is a piece of physical evidence that provides an almost direct link back to the family.
You cannot overstate the significance of this. Investigators searched the house and found the other half of this broken paintbrush, the section that wasn't used as the handle in Patsy Ramsey's art supply bin.
So part of the murder weapon is found with Patsy's personal art supplies.
It's extremely strong circumstantial evidence supporting the family involvement theory. It suggests that the murder weapon was fashioned quickly from easily available domestic materials.
Let's talk about the complexity of the knot on that garrote. Did the manner of the strangulation suggest a specific type of killer?
Well, the cord was wrapped 7 times around the paintbrush handle, forming a sort of crude tourniquet. This led to a major debate among investigators.
The IDI proponents argued what?
They argued the complexity indicated a sophisticated killer, maybe someone with military or, specific knot-tying experience.
And the RDI side?
They countered that the knot was simply overwrapped and chaotic. It suggested a frantic, inexperienced person, likely a panicked parent, trying desperately to secure the knot in the dark.
What does the medical evidence say about consciousness during the strangulation? We heard about petechia.
Petechia are tiny, pinpoint hemorrhages caused by broken capillaries, often found in the eyes, eyelids, or face.
And she had them.
Yes. In this context, they suggest that JonBenét's heart was still beating and that she was struggling for breath during the strangulation.
So that suggests she was alive, or at least capable of some kind of fight, when the garrote was applied.
Yes, but the medical examiner remained inconclusive on the precise sequence. If the head blow caused instant, deep unconsciousness, the struggle may have been minimal or even non-existent, even if she was still technically alive.
So we don't know. Was she strangled first and then struck to subdue her? Or was the blow first and the strangulation a finishing act on a comatose victim?
The exact order remains a devastating mystery.
Beyond the lethal trauma, the autopsy also noted subtle but significant findings related to sexual assault.
Dr. Meyer noted abrasions and hyperuremia, which is increased blood flow in the vaginal area. The most telling detail, though, was the discovery of a small piece of wood consistent with the paintbrush handle used in the garrote, found embedded in the vaginal mucosa.
Which implies penetration occurred with a foreign object, likely the paintbrush itself, rather than a penile assault, since no semen was found.
Correct. And we also have the visual evidence of staging or cover-up, the wiped appearance of the pubic area. This suggests the killer attempted to clean the victim after the assault.
If this was a domestic crime, this suggests a frantic attempt by the cover-up artist to eliminate any sexual evidence.
Conversely, let's look at the pieces of trace evidence that IDI proponents used to support the intruder theory, starting with those alleged sun gun marks.
This was a theory championed by Detective Louismet.
It was. He focused heavily on two sets of paired red dots or scrapes found on JonBenét's face and back. Smith believed these were burns or abrasions left by the electrodes of an air taser model 34,000, used to subdue her silently.
But this evidence is heavily challenged by other medical professionals.
Absolutely. Pathologists like Dr. Werner Spitz argued strenuously that these were not true burns. They lack the carbonization and specific ulceration that's characteristic of an electrical contact burn.
So what was their alternative theory?
They offered the train track theory, that the marks were just abrasions caused by the metal connectors of the toy train tracks found strewn all around the basement floor, maybe from the victim being moved or prodded with the weapon. Crucially, a stun gun or taser was never located in the Ramsey home or linked to any suspect.
And the other key piece of physical evidence for the IDI theory is the alleged point of entry, the broken, open basement window.
This window, coupled with a suitcase belonging to John Andrew Ramsey, positioned directly beneath it, was offered as proof. Proof that an intruder had broken the pane, squeezed through, and used the suitcase for leverage.
But again, the physical evidence offers a major contradiction.
The spider web. Investigators found an undisturbed spider web woven into the corner of the window frame, partially obstructed by the broken glass. Critics argue it's highly improbable, if not physically impossible, for an adult male to squeeze through that tight space without tearing that web.
While some reenactments tried to prove it was possible to step over it.
The untouched nature of the web and the lack of significant debris inside the room from a forced entry remains a powerful point of contradiction against that theory.
We've spent a lot of time detailing the overwhelming circumstantial evidence that supports the family involvement theory. You have the pineapple, the note, the homemade garrote. Now we have to address the single most robust piece of scientific evidence against that theory.
This is the bedrock of the intruder theory. The DNA of the unknown male, or UM1.
The DNA is the ultimate stumbling block for any prosecution against the Ramseys.
It is. Genetic material from an unknown male was recovered from two separate sources on the victim's clothing.
What was the first and, the strongest source?
The first source was a blood mixture on the victim's panties. 2 tiny spots of JonBenét's blood were found, and they contained a mix of her DNA and the DNA profile of this unknown male, UM1.
And the second profile came much later with more advanced forensic science.
Yes. Years later, investigators used more sensitive technology to recover what we call touch DNA. These are epithelial cells, essentially skin cells, that were scraped from the waistband of the long johns JonBenet was wearing over the panties.
And this touch DNA profile matched the UM1 profile from the panties.
It did. A perfect match. That DNA profile was, of course, entered into the National Criminal Database.
Can you clarify what that database is for our listeners?
Certainly. It was entered into CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System. This is the federal program that maintains millions of DNA profiles from convicted offenders and from forensic evidence collected at crime scenes.
And the key here is that the UM1 profile was run against this vast database and
it yielded no match.
Oh.
It does not belong to John, Patsy, Burke, or any cleared associate or suspect like Gary Oliva. It's a true ghost profile.
In 2008, this DNA evidence led the Boulder District Attorney, Mary Lacey, to take the extraordinary step of writing a formal letter of exoneration to the Ramsey family.
She did. Her reasoning was that the presence of the same unknown male DNA on 2 layers of the victim's clothing, the panties and the long johns, was definitive proof that an unknown killer handled those items during the commission of the assault.
And that exoneration created a massive legal controversy, didn't it?
It did, because many experts argued it was premature. They said it was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of touch DNA.
Let's define that controversy simply, because it's critical. What is the argument against treating UM1 as definitive proof of the killer's presence?
The core issue is the transfer theory, which is highly relevant to touch DNA. Think of touch DNA like shedding skin cells. You leave them on everything you touch. It's incredibly powerful, but it's also highly transferable and easily degraded.
So it could have come from anywhere.
Potentially. The underwear was brand new, and experts noted the possibility that the DNA could have been deposited by a worker at the factory where the underwear was manufactured, likely in Asia. It's essentially a pre-existing background contaminant.
Or transferred innocently earlier in the day.
Exactly. From
Yeah.
classmate or a friend giving her a hug. And then it's transferred from the victim's own body onto the second layer of clothing.
But the DNA mixed with the blood on the panties is much harder to dismiss, isn't it?
It is substantially stronger evidence, as it suggests the unknown male DNA was present at the exact site of a physical injury. However, the counter-argument maintains that the UM1 DNA could have already been present on the cloth as a background contaminant, and the blood simply soaked into that pre-existing DNA.
So we're left with this massive scientific ambiguity. Is UM1 the definitive biological footprint of the killer, or is it just highly degraded and transferable background noise?
And without a CODIS match and an identity for UM1, this evidence acts as a permanent legal shield for the Ramseys, regardless of the mountain of circumstantial evidence.
The contamination on day one meant investigators lost the ability to definitively contextualize the DNA. They couldn't prove if it was fresh from the crime or old from manufacturing.
And yet, even with that DNA ambiguity, investigators pursued several IDI suspects in the initial years. Let's look at the most heavily scrutinized profiles.
The most circumstantially compelling was a man named Gary Oliva.
He was a known registered sex offender and a drifter operating in the Boulder area at the time. On the night of December 26, 1996, he reportedly called a friend, sobbing, and confessed that he had hurt a little girl.
He also had other disturbing ties to the case years later.
Yes. When Oliva was arrested on drug charges in the year 2000, police found a backpack on him that contained a stun gun relevant to Lou Smith's theory, and most chillingly, a photo of JonBenét Ramsey in his wallet.
He later wrote letters from prison confessing to the murder, claiming it was an accident.
But the critical piece of hard evidence excluded him. His DNA was tested, and it does not match the UM1 profile. He is conclusively excluded as the source of that biological material.
Then there was Michael 𝐏𝐿𝐃𝐂𝐏.
𝐿𝐿𝐃 worked at a salvage yard located near the Ramsey home. He was noted for owning high-tech hiking boots which matched a print found near the house, and he reportedly had access to a stun gun.
But he died shortly after the murder.
He was found dead of a gunshot wound shortly after the DA publicly mentioned that the suspect list was narrowing. While it was ruled a suicide, some analysts found the positioning of the gun highly suspicious. Regardless, his DNA was tested post-mortem and also did not match UM1.
And the strange coincidence involving Bill McReynolds, the man who played Santa Claus at the Ramsey Christmas party.
McReynolds was a retired professor who was reportedly obsessed with JonBenét's pageant career. The profound coincidence was that his own daughter had been kidnapped exactly 22 years prior on December 26, 1974.
Which fueled theories of some kind of reenactment crime.
It did, but he too was cleared by both DNA and handwriting analysis.
So if the circumstantial IDI suspects are all cleared by the physical evidence, we have to return to the domestic theories and analyze the proposed motives for this massive cover-up.
The primary RDI theory focuses on a moment of rage by one or both parents. JonBenét's history of chronic bedwetting is a crucial detail here, confirmed by the urine-stained sheets and a plastic mattress cover found on her bed.
So the theory is that perhaps in the middle of the night, a parent was cleaning up after an accident.
And, in a fit of extreme frustration or rage, struck her, perhaps slamming her head against a hard surface like a bathtub or a sink.
And the cover-up begins immediately upon realizing the extent of the injury or death.
Yes. Fearing charges of child abuse or murder, the parents shifted immediately into crisis management, staging the scene to look like a kidnapping to protect the family unit and buy time to construct a cohesive alibi.
And the alternative domestic theory, the BDI, or Burke did it hypothesis, places the fatal blow with the 9-year-old brother.
This theory suggests Burke, possibly awake during that pineapple gap, since his fingerprints were on the bowl, was involved in a sibling dispute over the snack. In a momentary fit of childish rage, he struck his sister with an available weapon, likely that heavy Maglite flashlight, causing the fatal head trauma.
And the parents then discovered the scene and, in a panic, covered it all up to protect their only remaining child from the system.
Regardless of who struck the blow, the physical evidence of the staging, the ransom note, the cleaning, the placement of the body is consistent with an internal cover-up.
FBI analysis noted several staging flags.
He did. While most killers hide the body far away, in these panic-induced staged kidnappings, keeping the body close-like in the basement wine cellar is common. The elaborate note is the primary staging tool, and even the hasty redressing of the child, she was found in panties marked Wednesday that were too large for her, suggests frantic internal staging by someone trying desperately to change the scene quickly.
We arrive now at arguably the most legally and emotionally significant piece of evidence against the Ramseys, one that was intentionally withheld from the public for 14 years. The results of the grand jury proceedings held between 1998 and 1999.
This is a critical piece of the story that is often obscured by the media circus. The grand jury, which operates in secrecy, reviewed extensive testimony and evidence that was never made public.
And ultimately, they voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey.
They did. They returned what are called true bills on 2 specific counts each.
It is essential to understand, though, that they were not charged with first-degree murder, the act of killing the child.
Precisely. And that's a key distinction. The charges focused on the conduct surrounding the death and the subsequent cover-up. Count 4 was child abuse resulting in death.
The indictment read that they recklessly permitted the child to be unreasonably placed in a situation which posed a threat to the child's life or health, which resulted in the death of JonBenét Ramsey.
That wording strongly implies the grand jury believed the death was either an accident or occurred within the family environment due to reckless negligence or abuse, not due to an intruder.
And the second count, count the 7th, was even more explicit about the alleged cover-up.
This was accessory to a crime. It charged the Ramseys with rendering assistance to the killer with intent to hinder, delay, and prevent the discovery, detention, apprehension, prosecution, conviction, and punishment of such person for the commission of a crime.
The implication here is just profound. The grand jury believed that the Ramseys were actively obstructing justice, protecting the person who delivered the fatal blow.
Whether that was Burke or one of the parents acting in a fit of rage and denial.
Yet, despite the grand jury's vote, a body that found sufficient evidence to proceed to trial, the indictments were never signed.
No. The sitting district attorney, Alex Hunter, refused to sign them. They were kept secret.
And why did Hunter refuse to prosecute despite a legal indictment from a grand jury?
His reasoning was twofold, and it connects back directly to our initial discussion on the procedural failures. Hunter stated publicly that he did not believe he could secure a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt in a jury trial.
He cited the severely compromised crime scene, the contamination we discussed, and the presence of the conflicting UM1 DNA evidence.
He essentially prioritized the certainty of a conviction over simply proceeding with the case. He felt he couldn't win.
And the existence of these official indictments remained sealed until 2013, 14 years later, when a court order finally revealed them to the public.
It was a shock to many who had assumed the grand jury had simply failed to find sufficient evidence. It confirmed that the state at one point had a strong legal theory of cover-up against the Ramseys, but that the initial investigative chaos ultimately rendered the case legally impossible to try.
We also can't ignore the massive media campaign surrounding this case and how it created this sort of legal moat around the family. The fixation on the child beauty pageant narrative fueled so much public judgment and bias, especially in the 90s.
The media repeatedly aired footage of JonBenét in full makeup and costumes, creating a narrative of sexualized innocence that made the public instantly leap to conclusions of exploitation. The Ramseys, in response, used defamation lawsuits aggressively to fight back against those theories.
Burke Ramsey, in particular, famously sued CBS for a massive sum of $750 million after a docuseries proposed the BDI theory.
He also sued the pathologist Dr. Werner Spitz for defamation. These actions resulted in major confidential settlements. While a settlement is not an admission of innocence, these legal victories created a critical barrier.
It made it extremely dangerous for any media organization or commentator to definitively accuse the family, despite the weight of the circumstantial evidence and the grand jury's findings.
It essentially chilled critical, open discussion in the public sphere.
This investigation, looking at it through the lens of pure forensic data, is just a tragedy of errors that resulted in an unprecedented forensic stalemate. We are left with two perfectly supported yet perfectly contradictory realities.
On the intruder theory side, you have the hard science. The presence of the unknown male DNA, UM1, found on 2 pieces of the victim's clothing, mixed with blood in one spot. You have the open basement window and the potential for a sophisticated subdual implied by the alleged stun gun marks.
This offers the narrative that the Ramseys were the true victims of a horrific home invasion.
And then, on the family involvement side, you have the mountain of circumstantial evidence. The timeline contradiction of the pineapple proving the family was awake. You have the elaborate 25-minute ransom note with inside financial knowledge and linguistic inconsistencies.
The household weapon, the paintbrush garrote, tied directly to Patsy's art supplies. The bizarre 911 call. And, of course, the grand jury's vote to indict for accessory and child abuse.
This offers a narrative of a chaotic, panic-induced cover-up gone terribly wrong.
The contamination of the crime scene destroyed the ability to definitively link either the DNA to the assault or the circumstantial evidence conclusively to the family's actions. Without a matching identity for UM1 or a confession, the case remains frozen in limbo.
The Boulder Police Department continues to classify the case as open, consulting with new DNA technology firms, still searching for that definitive match. But the paradox holds firm.
And that leads to the final provocative question for you to consider. The true paradox of the Ramsey case is not simply who committed the crime, but whether justice failed because the investigation couldn't find the unknown killer.
Or whether justice failed because the evidence pointed too closely to those the parents were legally compelled to defend.
You have to weigh the single biological trace, the UM1 DNA, against the extensive staging materials, the 25-minute ransom note, the household paintbrush handle. Which piece of evidence do you find more compelling, knowing both were severely degraded by the errors of the investigation's very first day?
It is a question without a clear legal answer. Only forensic contradictions that continue to haunt the American legal system.